Hi, I'm Jeff Dalton, and I'm author of Great Big Agile, an operating system for agile leaders. Today, we're going to talk about leadership, but also about music, orchestras, and the coming collision of management and millennial workers throughout the United States. So stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything. Let me ask you, are you committed to up-leveling your leadership? Well, today we ask, are you a small, agile organization or a mammoth organization? Or maybe you are a small, rigid company operating like a mammoth. If so, you definitely want to catch this episode. Remember, you can chat about this episode or any past episodes in our Facebook group. Just look for Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast in Facebook. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. As always, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. And we always need your help in staying relevant. So please go over to iTunes or wherever it is that you tune in to podcasts, rate, review, and please subscribe to the show. We appreciate it. And you can also catch us on traditional radio stations across the United States every Monday and Thursday. We're going out all the way from Florida to Colorado, and now we just went live in Washington, D.C. on 96.7 FM, covering the Washington, D.C. and the Quantico area, so the FBI can listen to us. That's the only reason, really. You can also look for us on Roku TV, where we have over 100,000 subscribers. And if you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners, with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. Did you know you can also tune into us through Spotify, Google Home, Alexa by simply saying, play Dov Baron podcast? Yes, that's right. So I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you are a CEO, someone in the C-suite, a sales leader, entrepreneur, leader in any capacity, you know that we live in the fastest changing times we've ever known. Things that were yesterday's best practices are actually today's death rattle. The challenge is not just at the size of our organization, but also at the rigidity of the leaders in the front of those organizations. But how can you and I develop the level of agility we need to move quickly in the turbulent waters of today's business world? Well, let's find out together. My guest on this episode is Jeff Dalton. He is the chief evangelist at Agile CXO. And his new book, Great Big Agile, an operating system for agile leadership, examines the coming crisis of leadership. Jeff draws on 35 years of technology leadership from Silicon Valley to Detroit to frame the coming conflict that offers a new model for leaders who need to transform themselves from command and control managers into inspirational motivators who are stewards and operators of self-organizing and enabling infrastructures. He has written for CIO Magazine, CIO Online, Better Software Magazine, and the Cutters of IT Business Journal on agile leadership in large-scale environments. His new book, as I said, is Great Big Agile. It's available at book retailers everywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome the Mary Lou Retton of Agile Leadership, Mr. Jeff Dalton. Yeah.
Wow, what an intro. I'll buy it. I'll buy that book. Well, I'm not very tall, so that's actually a pretty good metaphor. She was rather height challenged, so so am I. So that works out very well. Thank you.
But she was very flexible, very agile.
Yes, she was. Yes, that's interesting. I'll try to use that.
Yeah, you should. Actually, do you know? I don't know if you know who Ariel Ford is. I had Ariel Ford on my show years ago. Her and I are friends now, but years and years ago, and I did an intro for her, and I can't remember what it was that I said, but I added something in there, and it's now in her official bio. For every introduction she gets has this one thing in there that was kind of like the Mary Lou Retton of Agile Leadership. It was just me being a clown. So you're free to use it.
You know, it's a really good metaphor because in order for us to be agile and to be agile leaders, we have to be as disciplined and fine-tuned as Mary Lou was, right? It isn't magic. And that's what people struggle with on this topic is, agile means quickly changing and quickly reacting to change. And of course it does, but you don't do it by accident, right? You have to be as nimble and as physically tuned in as Mary Lou Retton or any of the other Olympic athletes are, right?
That's a very good point. It's a very good point.
Yeah.
So, let me ask you, because you are at the cutting edge of something here with Agile Leadership. So who is someone that we likely wouldn't even know who has been a major influence on you, not only in leadership, but potentially even in life?
Well, any number, and this is probably going to throw a couple of people off the rails.
Sure.
But any number of great orchestra conductors, I would say Ormandy, who conducted the Philadelphia Orchestra, is probably my favorite because an orchestra conductor is the master of agility. They need to prepare their charges extremely well. They need to instill a great deal of discipline and process discipline into the work that gets done. They need to motivate people to have a level of excellence that most people don't realize how difficult it is to have that level of excellence that a symphony orchestra has to have. You're talking about 120 people working together as a team without any real specific leadership during the performance. Yeah, sure, a conductor starts things, and what a conductor really does is they lead the emotion of the orchestra. They lead the behavior of the orchestra, but the process itself is self-organizing and self-enabling. So a great orchestra conductor, and Eugene Ormandy is a perfect example, motivates people to want to self-organize in a way that creates an excellent product. And all the conductor really does is create emotion. Another really good example in that field is Leonard Bernstein. And I don't know if you've ever watched Leonard Bernstein. He was, of course, the great composer and the head of the New York Philharmonic for many years. He famously barely moved his conducting stick, what they call the baton. And of course, some conductors wave this huge baton around like they're a marching band, in the front of the marching band. But he was famous for moving his baton an inch and saying, that means you have to play really loud here. And so he was a master at pulling the emotion and pulling the desire to be great out of 120 people all at the same time. And when I work with our clients, I see it as, because my background's in music. My first degree was in classical music, and I played in symphony orchestras for a couple of decades before I started doing this. I see a company as an orchestra. Everyone has their part. Everyone has to be disciplined and what we call have a high degree of craftsmanship in order for them to self-organize. And one of the things we find that's really frustrating is, especially with the younger generation, they think self-organization means I just get to make it up as I go. And it's really the opposite of that, true self-organization. And by definition, the ability to have empowered organizations comes after discipline and hard work, not before it.
So let's go into it for a minute, because you just brought up something that I want to step into right away, because I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of misconceptions about what agile means.
Yeah.
Right. And it, of course, agile, if you look it up, it means flexible, is the ability to move fast and all that kind of stuff. But as you said in the beginning, like with Mary Lou Retton, incredible agility, but incredible discipline. If you were to summarize what agility means to you, because we're hearing this language now, agile leadership.
Yeah.
But as you said, I think people misunderstand what it means. Tell us what does Agile mean to you if you were to say to somebody out there, are you an Agile leader? And they said, well, I don't know what that means. It means this.
Right. Agile is a leadership mindset that transforms a leader from being a task manager in a command control environment into a steward of a self-organizing architecture that everyone in the organization embraces and adopts. And it transforms leaders from a CEO to leadership throughout the organization. So everyone in the organization is an operator of this self-organizing architecture. And leadership in traditional sense, CXOs, directors, vice presidents, their role in this is to be operators and stewards of that architecture. Mm-hmm. And that mindset is based on a set of values, which I'm sure you're familiar with, values that we've been talking about for many years, by the way, right?
Sure.
Higher degree of transparency, empowerment, stewardship, servant leadership. So all these things are words that you and I have been using. I don't know how old you are, but I've used them at least since the 80s, probably, right? We've been talking about, hey, you got to do this. And what Agile has done for us has brought a framework to this discussion that didn't exist before. Right. So I often start my presentation out with, has anyone ever been told that you're empowered? And everyone raises their hand, of course. And then I ask, of course, we've all been told we're empowered. And then I say, is anyone willing to stand up and describe what that means to be empowered? And of course, the hands all go down because no one really has a clear understanding of it. And I usually follow it up with a joke about how an empowering manager is walking out the door, and as his team is waving goodbye, someone says, now that she's gone, who's going to empower us now? Right?
Yeah.
And I say, if you have to ask that question, then obviously there isn't this self-organizing, you were never empowered to begin with, right? So if you're empowered at the blessing of someone else, then you're not, right? Yeah. And of course, we've all had great managers that have made us feel empowered, but the minute they move on, or the minute I have to interface with another part of the organization, I realize I'm really not. Right. And the problem, the reason that happens is we don't have this architecture that's crisply defined with discipline and precision of what everybody's role is and what they're allowed to do without asking permission. We call this a roles and accountabilities model in my book. And this idea of self-subscribing to accountabilities and management also agreeing that they never have to ask permission to execute them is a very important part of the architecture that almost everybody misses when they say they want to be agile.
When I think of it, even because I tend to put things into imagery for myself. When I think of it, I think of agility as I was born in the UK and lived there for the first 20 years of my life, and seeing starlings and they swoop, and there's this magnificent agility, and through the work of biologist Rupert Sheldrake, you find out there's actually no leader.
Right. There's
actually no leader. There's no, like, everybody thinks there's a leader, like you see the goose flying in the V, but in the swallows, there's no leader. There's simply a resonance of agility that is constantly moving and shifting. And that's what, for me, that's what agile leadership is. It appears somebody's in the lead, but then in the next second, it appears somebody else or something else is in the lead.
Right.
And there's just the movement and the willingness to move with what is needed as it shows up. And that requires everyone to be empowered to step into it in any moment. But I think and this is why I wanted to come to this, is because I think that is a philosophy that is often lost in practicality. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I think that more and more of us are embracing the idea of, we need agile leadership. We need to collapse the hierarchy. We need to empower people. But do you? I mean, really, do you?
Right.
Because especially if you're our age, you grew up with the hierarchy. You grew up with the idea that, well, I'm at the top of the triangle here. I'm empowering everybody, but ultimately I've got to sign the check. So how do we get that integrated into the system so that it's not just a philosophy, it's not just a great idea, it's not just this week's trend, but it's actually something that we're actually doing. How do we get that there, Jeff? Because you know that better than anybody, how to do that.
Right. And the reason I wrote the book was I realized that leaders don't know how to do it. They literally don't have a clue how to do it. Now, they know the words, and many of them that I've worked with truly want to do it. So I don't believe it's a malicious intent here. Some of them, maybe some of them, but most of them really want to make that happen, and they just don't know what steps to take.
Right.
And this is why I talk about architecture a lot, because when leadership tries to implement a high trust, or what we call a high trust, transparent and self-organizing organization, what they do is they stop managing people. Right? And they say, I'm not going to manage you anymore. I'm going to let you decide what's best. And those words are the right words. They sound very good, and we need to be saying those things, but they don't equip them to actually do that.
Right.
So it's just like saying to an orchestra, I'm no longer going to direct you. You can play whatever notes you want that you think will sound good. And we don't provide them with the guide rails. We don't provide them with the tools. We don't provide them with the sort of philosophical architecture that they need to actually make that happen themselves. Because ultimately, leaders aren't the ones that make it happen, right? It's people that work for the company that make it happen. So leadership's all busy saying, we're going to be self-organizing, so you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. And by the way, you have to go to this mandatory training and fill out these forms because we're a self-organizing, empowered organization. So they make process the enemy, and they believe that process is what's going to get them there, and process is what in fact is their impediment. Right? So it's all well-meaning, and so they put together a two-dimensional manifestation of what they want people to do by writing process on paper, and say, here's the steps you need to follow to be a high-trust, self-organizing team. And of course, that's the opposite of what we want them to do, right?
Right.
So we want them to build a system that everybody can live and thrive within, that provides them with a definition of high performance that they self-subscribe to, and then a governance organization that helps them self-govern that through peer review and peer accountability. That's why in the book, we don't represent anything as a linear process. We represent it as a set of holons, which are self-organizing entities that can act on their own, but also integrate well with others. And this idea of a holon, multiple people have written about it. I didn't invent it, but The Ghost of the Machine was the first book that was published where Kussler talked about the holon as an entity that is fully capable, fully disciplined to operate on their own, but can also integrate freely with other parts of the organization who can also operate on their own. And for my listeners and my clients, who are all mostly technology companies, this resonates with them because I typically talk about it in terms of software development, where we have class libraries that get inherited and shared across projects and are used to interface with other libraries and other projects at the software level, at the architecture level. And they're able to see the comparisons here. In the music world, it's the same thing. You know, a cellist is a virtuoso all on their own, but they integrate really well with the violinist who's sitting across from them, in front of them. So each one of them is a master at the craftsmanship that they exhibit, but they also are masters at interfacing with others in their organization. And the reason for that is because we have a very disciplined set of music theoretical constraints that we work within, these guide rails, sharps, flats, time signatures, volume indicators, all expression indicators, all of these things. We have a language that we have within our own, that we have within companies also, right? That we use to interface with one another in a self-organizing way. Most leaders don't know how to do that.
Well, you said in the book that 63% of leaders are projecting a philosophy that conflicts with agile value. Right. While saying that they want to be an agile organization. And you also go on to say that 51% lack the basic skills to lead an agile organization. And this is what I'm saying about where I wanted to get to with you, is that it's I really do believe that, as you said, it's not malicious. Leaders want to be agile. They want to have agile organizations, but they don't know what to do. It's a lovely idea.
Right. And you know what? We did this to ourselves, right? Because the things we're teaching from Cambridge to Stanford to Berkeley to Yale and Harvard, the techniques we're teaching young business students, MBAs that eventually become CEOs and CFOs of companies, the things we're teaching them are antithetical to the things you and I are talking about. It was one of my favorite quotes on this. I think I might even have it in the book. Is Benjamin Disraeli, who was the Prime Minister of England in late 1800s, and he's a treasure trove of quotes. I don't know if you've read any of his items, but
many.
One of his famous ones is when asked about giving other people opportunities in the new government, he said, "I've learned to climb a greasy pole, and I'm not getting down." And so that really resonated with me, because it's like the things that it takes to be a CXO in a company or any kind of senior officer in a company, the skills that it takes to move up are antithetical to the skills that we're asking people to display in this philosophy that we're discussing today. So the things I had to, my whole career, I wanted to be a chief information officer when I was a young programmer. And I thought that was the job to have, and really kept my eyes focused on that. And I finally became a chief engineering officer. And I turned to my wife and I said, "This sucks."
Sucks, yes.
This is the worst job on the planet. I have no authority. It's a viper's pit up here in this group of guys who are here. And as it turns out, the kind of people that move up quickly in organizations are the sharp-elbowed, assertive, command and control, very type A people. And not saying that that's a bad thing necessarily for them, but they certainly aren't the people to get off the top of their greasy pole anytime soon. And a lot of people say to me, "Well, Jeff, now that we have all this talk about agile at the lower levels of the organization, those people will eventually get promoted, right? They'll eventually move up and they'll bring this, this rainbow and these unicorns to shower upon us, and everything will be, good in the end, right, Jeff?" I'm like, "Well, no, because they transform as they move up, right?"
And that's one of the things you and I were talking about in a previous conversation. I think it's important for us to have our viewers, our listeners grasp is that, for me, the best analogy is, because of our age bracket here, I'm a very young baby boomer. I'm suggesting that you are that, maybe even younger. So I'm the very last of the baby boomers. And I can remember baby boomers who were 10 years older than me saying, "I'm never going to work for the man." And they've become the man.
That's right.
Right. And they've become the man. Yeah. And it's a great analogy for what you're talking about is, we want to make sure that there's distributed power and that there's this agile leadership that's going on until I get into that role.
That's right.
I'm in that role. Well, we should probably keep it for a while.
I'm going to be better. I'm going to fix it from the inside, right?
Yeah, I'll fix it from the inside, but I'll do what everybody else did, but I'll drip a little more power out than the last guy did. And this is something that you and I had talked about, which is the Peter principle, that people move up to the level of their incompetence, that they're not trained in leadership. They're trained in skills, but not the leadership side, which is the humanity and the importance of that humanity. So how do we pull that apart? And so that, well, I know one of the ways we pull it apart is we read your book, which is full of pictures. Well, because we're a bit thick and we need we need the pictures, right? So it's a picture book. It's full of cartoons and stuff that'll allow us to grasp it. Because I think that it's vital for us to get that. Not only is this you may be 35, 38, 40 years old looking at this and going, yeah, when I get to that role. But the question you're actually asking us to look at is, are you really going to be an agile leader should you get the C-suite role? And that's the bigger question, right?
Right. And that's right. And then, you kind of joked about the pictures. It's funny you say that, because I created a picture book on purpose, because leaders, when the door was closed, were telling me, "Hey, Jeff, I don't know how to do this. I don't even know what this looks like."
Right.
And, Agile has, the Agile frameworks have a very ceremonial nature to them, a very behavioral ceremonial nature, which is one of the reasons I'm attracted to it. And you can observe behaviors that are quote unquote Agile, but these leaders, and some of them were young, were telling me, "Hey, I don't even know what it looks like. Can you show me what it looks like?" So I said, and I have a fabulous artist named Sam Melroy that works for our company. And she created all these designs for me by coming with me and observing and talking to us about what they all looked like. And so we wanted to create a picture book, but we also tried to dissect what the behavior looks like. So starting with leadership, we said, here are the actual actions that an empowering leader takes every day. And here's what your office looks like. And here's what your hallway looks like. And here's how you hire people. And we're not saying, of course, if you don't do 100% of these things, this is an evolutionary process.
Yes.
So if you're familiar with the martial arts, and I know you and I have a great joint friend in Jim Bouchard, who has this approach to leadership that mirrors the martial arts. He and I were talking about the Shuhari, which is three levels of evolution within martial arts training. And that's exactly what we've done in this book. We said a Shu level is someone who is just starting out and doesn't know what they don't know. So they think they're killing it and they think they're really good at it, but they're really destructive in what they do. The re-level is, I finally have been broken of that. I finally realized that there's stuff I don't know and I need to learn. So I'm stepping back and working on my forms and working on the basics, because the basics are really where the problem lies. And then the mastering level, the re-level is now I'm a 10th degree black belt and I know what I'm talking about, and I also know that there's a lot more to learn. So what we found is that most companies, we assessed about 250 companies, were in the Shu level, the beginner level, where they thought they were killing it. They thought they were doing great, but they were really being quite destructive. So we created the picture book because we said, hey, this is what it looks like. And then we created steps for them to take, like sort of a physical fitness plan, if you will. A practice plan for a musician. Here are the things, and if you do these things, you will eventually get to be a master at this. But here's something really interesting. We've been kind of talking about leaders this whole time, but there's a component for the lower level, the workers as well, right? They also have to be part of the team, and I don't want to blame this on leadership. Leadership definitely needs lots of help. But there's this really super interesting cultural phenomenon going on with younger workers coming into the workforce. All studies point to a deep desire for self-organization and autonomy. So if you look at, I talk about a Gallup study in the book where over the last 30 years, in almost every category, Americans have lost faith in leadership, in traditional leadership. Everything from school to Congress to banking to business to church to and the only one that Gallup says, it tells us, is raised since then is law enforcement, which is super interesting when you think about it, because as leaders start to be diminished and less respected, and if we don't have this architecture in place to guide us, we have chaos, right? And people turn to law enforcement and say, protect us from the chaos. But here's what I'm thinking about writing my next book on this. Younger people are coming into the workforce with a high demand for autonomy and self-organization, but more than ever before are looking to leadership and government to discipline and force people to behave in the way they want you to behave. So you're seeing a lot of people asking government and asking leadership to say, hey, I don't like this person or the way this person talks to me over here. I need you to come in and fix that. And your comment about, that when we were young in the 60s, not working for the man, made me think of that, because it's like, well, I don't want to work for the man, but I want the man to protect me when the time comes when I think I'm being, some offense has been cast upon me. So that's going to be a really interesting thing to unravel for leaders in the future. Exactly.
Well, you've talked about this in the book, in saying that you believe there's a coming crisis of leadership, and today's leaders are on a collision course with young team members, young upcoming leaders, with disastrous results. And I think that, I wrote my last book about leading millennials and why it's important to lead them differently. But I do see this fascinating, for me at least, it's fascinating polarity, which is, everybody should have a right except the people who don't agree with me.
Right. Exactly.
Like,
we're seeing that's another difference from the 60s, right? Where, live and let live has now become,
PC.
You have to be PC. And the other interesting thing there is how much influence and information younger people are willing to give up to the government and to senior managers. I saw a funny cartoon on Facebook the other day. It was like 1960s, don't talk on the phone, the government's listening. And then right now there's a woman talking to Alexa and she's like, hey, government, what's the recipe for blah, blah, blah. And we're just letting them have all this information, which of course they'll use, they'll respect and use with integrity and not try to control us. Of course, we can all assume that, right? Yeah,
we can all assume the government is always going to be on our side.
Right, but and in the business context, leadership is government, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, in terms of, how do we deal with this? Obviously, I wrote the book and I hope people will read it and get something from it. But we also have to go back to business school, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to change the way we're teaching people, starting at the lowest levels of how to interact and manage with other people. And when I went to business school, we learned about how to command and control people, how to task people, how to measure them, how to hold them accountable, how to do performance reviews, how to do all these things that we see in traditional business. And if you think about it, we've been doing this since the Roman legions, right? Mm-hmm. If you go back to Caesar and the legions, even really down back to Alexander the Great even, who was a little bit less structured, and I'm kind of a fanatic about that history. I'm reading this great book now called The 10 Caesars that really gets into how the military was organized. And we have the same structure today in business that Caesar had in 28 AD BC, the way he organized his legions, and we haven't shifted from it one iota. Yet we're telling people to be agile. And here's something interesting: the U.S. Army is becoming very agile. I interact with, yeah, it really is. I interact with a lot of these guys in my business, and they're really doing a good job of pushing decision making on the battlefield down to the lowest level. Generals no longer go out on the battlefield and command like they used to. They really set an architectural framework. They put communications and guidelines in place, and then they tell their people to go win wars. And the U.S. Army is thought, you think about the Army as being really command and control.
Absolutely.
Uniform Code of Military Justice is very, very harsh. But what the Army is all about now is discipline and precision and decision-making being made at the lowest possible level during the battle. And they're even dropping local area networks on the battlefield now and integrating all of these weapon systems and people together in their goggles and on their screens, and then letting them fight the war the best way they see fit as the battle's unfolding.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I spoke for the U.S. Air Force in 2018, and it was my first time presenting for any military group. And I was on a base and spent some time with them, and honestly was so pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Because, I had my own bias. And it's one of the things I talked about at the event. And I said, I want to thank everybody here for helping me to breach my own bias about the military, because I thought these are going to be a bunch of people who don't think for themselves.
Right.
I admit I was ignorant. And they
all are. Yeah.
Of course, if you're not in it, you don't know, right? So, and I knew the commander, because the commander is somebody I'd actually mentored and coached. Yeah. So I knew him, and I knew he was like that. But I thought he was like, he's a left field guy.
Yeah.
But what I realized was, no, this is his base. This is how he brings up the leadership, and he's created this agility in the leadership across the platform there. And it was fascinating for me to see that. And he's like, no, my commander did that with me. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
So it's interesting that the environments that we think would be the most rigid are actually on the cutting edge of agility. And the things that we think are most agile, which might be Silicon Valley, from what you're saying in your book, is that actually oftentimes they don't have much agility at all.
Yeah, my experience from the research is that things are the opposite of what we think they are. So I agree with you 100% on Silicon Valley. My interactions with them, I don't find them very agile at all. I find that they hire really great, high-performing people, and they work in a fairly chaotic environment, and they do pull out some great victories that are brilliant, no doubt. But that's a different kind of business than, say, building 15 million automobiles. So, my friends in Silicon Valley are fond of saying, those dinosaurs like GM and Ford and Chrysler, they're so, backwards in the way they do business. And I always say, well, you try to run a plant that builds 15 million cars, and you'll find that it's a very different kind of culture. It has to be. But I have also found that organizations that hire and put military personnel, especially officers, in leadership positions tend to be more agile, more empowering, having a much more motivated and positive culture than, say, a Silicon Valley company where the Steve Jobs wannabe comes down and screams and yells at the people and says you have to work 80 hours a week. So it's a very different environment, but I find the military leaders to be much more empowering and agile than anything else I've ever seen. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And what's fascinating to me is that, when I've spoken about this, I've written articles on how I believe that the greatest dinosaur example is Steve Jobs, because he was absolutely a command and control leader. Was he an innovative genius? Without a shadow of a doubt. I have no doubt of that. Was he a visionary? Absolutely. Was he a command and control leader? Absolutely. Did he have any skills for human development and how to work?
Apparently not. Yeah.
Terrible. Everything I've read is awful. And so it's fascinating that this demigod of Silicon Valley, is actually a command and control leader that they all look up to. And instead of realizing that actually, and we see it. I mean, you're seeing these people who are working 60, 80, 90, 100 hours a week, crazy hours, and losing themselves entirely in the process. So it's, we've got to adopt and adapt something differently, particularly as you talked about with millennials who want more autonomy, they want less rigidity around where they work, when they work, all those kinds of things. What is the question we need to start asking ourselves in order to become more agile? So how do, at a personal level, what is the question we need to ask ourselves as leaders in order to become more agile?
Sure, that's a great question, and there's one word. It has a one-word answer, at least in my opinion. I'll say it in a sentence instead of one word. Am I trusted?
Trust, right?
Am I trusted? Yeah. So someone was asking me, I think it was a CIO magazine interview a couple of weeks ago. What's the value of all values? Like Agile is famous for talking about its values, and there's a core set of values that Agile frameworks are based on. And I say the most important thing to measure, the most important thing to understand is, am I trusted? If you unpack that, or what I like to say in software, if you reverse engineer what it takes to be trusted, right? So if I'm trusted by my employees, it means they believe I have their best interests at heart. They believe I'm doing what's best for them. They believe I am empowering and trusting them. They believe that they are treated fairly by me and are compensated fairly. They believe that if I have an issue with them, I will talk to them directly. And basically what I tell my young consultants is, treat your employees like your next door neighbor, right? You want to have trust with your next door neighbor, right? You don't want your neighbor to rob your house. You don't want him to throw trash on your lawn. So you in turn do things to make sure that you have mutual trust between yourselves, right? But it doesn't stop there. We have to have trust, what I call bi-directional values traceability. We have to have values traceability vertically throughout the organization. So the lowest level in the software business, testers are often entry-level folks. The lowest level tester, through the architects, through the software developers, that trust has to be bi-directional. So not only does this notion of trust have to be based on leadership, which, by the way, trust in one direction is just command and control, right?
Of course it is. Yeah.
But I have to be able to trust as a leader, the lowest level person to do the right thing for the organization and to maintain trust among his or her peers. And the way they do that is they become disciplined. They have integrity in their work. They show precision, or what we call craftsmanship in their work.
Right.
And they always do the right thing, and they do what is expected of them from a trust standpoint. So this notion is a really good place to start when you're really trying to take an unhealthy organization into a healthy organization, is building bidirectional trust between the organizations. But it's not magic.
No.
Right? I've been in so many companies in my life where the leader's like, I want you to trust me, and I'm empowering you, and I'm pushing responsibility down. And then of course they don't do any of those things, right?
No.
A lot of times it's, when I went to Silicon Valley for the first time, it was 2001. And I was being brought into a software company that was developing software products. And this is right when the .com market crashed. So you remember that. The market totally dive bombed. All these companies that weren't making money went out of business, as they should have, right? And
well, they bought a URL and suddenly they were worth $5 million.
Right, exactly. And that's what the 23-year-old CEO said, right?
Yeah.
So my first job as vice president of operation was to lay 50 people off. And there's a lot of ways to lay people off. But the only right way is to sit down with each one of them individually, demonstrate empathy, caring for them and their family, because that's what they're worried about. And talk to them coach them about how to recover from it and how to survive it and how to move on to the next opportunity. I had peers that just sent out emails to 50 people saying you're done tomorrow. And so this is what I mean about trust. It doesn't happen by accident. No. It's a difficult, highly disciplined and precise thing that we have to do as leaders, but we also need our people on our teams to do the same thing, right? So Absolutely. What I tried to write about in the book is, this is what the entire ecosystem looks like of building a high trust, self-organizing team. And if you don't do everything, you might be progressing, but you're never going to get there. You need an ecosystem in place to do this. So that's what I think we need to do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the work that we do is around building trust and why trust is so vitally important, and that and like you said, people say, trust me. Well, why the hell should I do that?
Why should I? Yeah.
Why should, people say you need to respect me. Well, why? Why do I need to respect you? That's a command and control. And the analogy I give all the time, because it's based on my work, is what you're being is the authoritarian parent.
Right.
And if you're an authoritarian parent, if you've ever been a child, and if I'm talking to you, you have been a child, you remember what happens with an authoritarian parent. Right. You go behind, when they're not looking, you go, and you run off and you do exactly what it is you want to do.
That's right.
And that's exactly what you don't get trust, you get rebellion. That is the nature of human beings.
That's right, yeah.
And so, that trust has got to be built through reciprocity. And you've got to have that. You've got to trust them, because they can't trust you unless you trust them. And you've actually got to demonstrate the very thing you're asking for. And so often as leaders, I believe that that's where we fail.
I agree, yeah.
Now, I'm a great believer, you've talked about a lot of stuff here, and it's fascinating because I have friends who have been in great orchestras, who went to Juilliard, and who are now leaders, and who have been professional musicians. We've actually even interviewed musicians and stuff on here as well. And you've been a pilot. You are a pilot. You build experimental aircraft. I mean, you've been off in a few different directions. You've had a certain amount of agility yourself. Some might say reinvention. But, you've done all that. I am a great believer that we are shaped and formed by the psychology of the early parts of our lives. And, as wonderful or crap as our childhood might have been, and sometimes we like to lie to ourselves about either side of that. Yeah. But nonetheless, we are shaped and formed in our formative years. And for some, that gives us wings, and for some, that crushes us. How has your childhood shaped who you are today?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I look through my childhood, and I've been fortunate enough to get to do so many things, but I was actually born into a traveling music group. My father, think, I don't know if the UK had the Partridge Family or not.
Oh, yeah, we got the TV show, The Partridge Family.
We were like the Partridge Family unplugged. It was a folk music group, and my dad was a music teacher, and he formed this folk music group. So by the time I was 8, I was doing performances and on stages, and some of them were small and some of them were large. But I learned from that. I learned really how to collaborate and stay cool on stage with lots of people I normally weren't wanting to stay cool with, like my brothers and my sisters and things like that. And I learned how to communicate with audiences, right, from a very young age. And so I eventually went to music school, but for various reasons decided not to follow that career path eventually. And when I started getting into the business world, anytime they wanted somebody to talk to the customer, they'd say, "Get Jeff, he's really good in front of the customer." So I became like the guy who always gave the presentations and always talked. And of course, one thing leads to another, and people start asking you for advice. And so I think that experience of growing up, on stage, growing up in a musical group, and then, playing in orchestras in Spain and Mexico and elsewhere, taught me a few things. Taught me how to collaborate with groups of people in order to produce something. It taught me about excellence from a very young age. I was playing in orchestras at 12 or 13 years old and had to perform live, and eventually became a soloist and a jazz musician. And it taught me how to work with discipline and precision while producing an artistic product, right? And so when I got into computer science, the guy interviewing me said, you have to be really disciplined and produce an excellent product every time. And I'm like, I got this, right? The hard part of getting into computer science for me wasn't learning about the computer sciencey part. It was about just transitioning my skills from a deep understanding of how to be disciplined and precise and create art to how to be disciplined and precise and create products. And when I was talking earlier about business school, what we have to do with the schools is teach people about those things instead of about spreadsheets and P&Ls. Spreadsheets and P&Ls are important, but frankly, you can teach somebody how to do that on the job. What business schools aren't putting out today are people who have specific discipline and precision and know how to turn that into a marketable product.
What do you think is the number one discipline missing? If you had to say, this is the one that I see constantly that people fail on. They don't have the discipline around this. What is this?
Yeah, there's a long list, but I would say
sure.
I would say the first one is communications.
Yeah.
People are generally very weak at communicating with other people in a couple of different dimensions. The first one is words. People really struggle and trip over words, and they don't have a very good clarity around the meaning of the words that they're using. And language deteriorates over time, and the American English language has deteriorated significantly since 1776. And people really struggle with the meaning of words, and that creates unnecessary friction in the organization. The other area of communications that I think we need much better craftsmanship in is emotional communications. We don't do a good job as business people of communicating what we really mean, because the words alone are not enough, right? And this is one thing that's really hurting us here is businesses' tendency to move towards virtualization. Like you and I are having a conversation today, and we can see each other's faces, and we're having a fantastic conversation. But if this were just a telephone call, much of what you said or I said would have been misunderstood, because I can tell from just the tiny bit of crease in your eye that you're joking or you're being whimsical or that you're being serious. And businesses running headlong into virtualization to keep costs down And I always say, no, you need to get these people over here in the room, or at the very least get on video together and have that meeting. So those two areas of communication, craftsmanship, are probably the number one thing that we need to work on.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We're moving into the lightning round of the show here. So this is where we do fast questions and fast answers. So Jeff Dalton, what makes you cry?
What makes me cry is when I see a human being doing something amazing. That almost made me cry when I said that. When I see Pele do that backwards kick into the net, I burst out crying like a baby.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you. I'd forgotten about that one.
Wasn't that amazing?
That was, my God, what year was that? That was like
early 80s, I think, maybe late 70s.
Maybe late 70s. Yeah, that's a long time ago.
There's so many examples. You know, when Neil Armstrong put his foot on the moon, I was 8 years old. I just burst out crying.
Yeah, that moment of magnificence in humanity.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's very inspiring. Thank you for reminding me of that. What makes you cry laughing?
What makes me cry laughing? My two sons make me cry laughing.
Yeah?
Yeah, they're constantly goofing on me, but I love them, and I know that they're well-meaning. So I'm in love with my children. They make me do that.
How old are you boys?
I have a 23-year-old who's out in Hollywood trying to make it in movies, and I've got a 26-year-old in med school.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What has been the most difficult inner demon you've had to battle with?
Wow, that's a really good question, but I think it's hubris. I think it's hubris. You know, it's hard when you're a child growing up on a stage in front of 1,000 people, when you're going through that very self-centered part of your life that teenagers go through. It's hard not to think that you're awesome. And
we can see it in the child stars of today, right?
Yeah, and you know, I went to very prestigious music schools, and I remember getting out of music school, and I was 20 years old, and I was pretty full of myself, and going for my first audition and not getting it, and I was like, what? Like, what happened? And as it turns out, so here's the thing, it turns out that there's other really smart, talented people too.
Really?
Yeah. Who knew? Who knew, right? And so I struggle with that because, as you said, when you're young, those things form the rest of your life. So I always have to check myself and say, hey, there's people in their mother's basement that play bass better than you do, Jeff. So I struggle with that my whole life.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important for us to understand these things because, as I've said so many times, I believe that we listen to people like yourself who are top of their game, and we think, but it's different for Jeff because I'm this or I'm that, and Jeff's the other thing. And I always like to remind us that we're all human and we're all flawed and we're all working on our shit.
Yeah.
And it's important for us to deal with that. One of the things I believe is that real leadership requires courage. What is the most difficult leadership decision you've had to make?
I think the most difficult leadership decision I've ever had to make was deciding which 50 people to lay off from that .com that I was telling you about earlier. Wow. And the board gave me a list and said, you need to pick 50 people off this list. And not only was I new to the company and I didn't have a lot of data, but, to me, I feel very, very, personal about the people that work in my company, and I feel like they're family members, and every one of them was like telling a child, I'm cutting you off, and it was very tough. Stuck with me for the last 25 years.
I can imagine. I imagine that would be insane.
Yeah.
What's a guilty pleasure for you?
Well, I'm a food addict. And it's been a struggle my whole life. I have to work out a lot. I have to watch what I eat all the time because I just love a fantastic meal, and I can't say no to it. So if I don't say no to it, I'll end up being 300 pounds, and I'm trying not to do that.
Yeah, because it's difficult to climb on stage and play the bass then.
I can't fit into my spandex, you know.
Right. Playing bass in Spanx is not a good idea.
Not anymore, yeah.
Not anymore. What did you learn in the last 24 hours?
In the last 24 hours, interesting.
Also,
No, that's fantastic. In the last 24 hours, I learned that I'm getting to the age where I need to sleep more. I was at a conference all week where I was speaking at various events. I was teaching. I was manning a booth for part of it. I was going out and partying with the leadership team. I was drinking more than I should have probably. And I realized that I'm 57 years old, and Jeff, you need at least 8 or 9 hours a day, or else you can't get through the day. And that I was flying home last night I was in Washington D.C. all week, flying home to the Keys, and I was beat. So more sleep.
I have definitely found that in my 40s, I was sleeping on average about 4.5 hours a night.
Right.
I got to my 50s and went, oh shit, I need 7.
Yeah.
I need 7. I mean, I never set an alarm, but it's like, I got to get 7 now.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I need 8 or 9 at this point.
In a parallel universe, what's your career?
That's easy. Jazz bass player.
Yeah,
that's easy. I look across, my life, and played quite a bit when I was young, and decided not to make a go of it professionally for a couple of different reasons. But I always look back and say, I could have done that. Look at that guy. I could have been him. But then I wouldn't have my wife and my children and my career and all the great things I've been lucky enough to be part of. But it's going to be my fourth career. You just stay tuned on that.
No, very cool. Very cool. So this has been awesome. It's been great. Tell us, really? I want to finish off with a practical piece of guidance, based on everything you've been talking about with regard to agile leadership, and you're the man around that. So give us one piece of practical guidance, practical advice that myself, my listeners, my viewers can go away and say, you know what, I can put this in action to really start moving to really genuinely being an agile leader, as opposed to it being a concept.
Right. So for all the leaders that are listening, go back to your office today and build an agile environment around just your team. In other words, don't worry about the whole company. Don't worry about changing the culture. Take the door off your office, put a, task board up in the wall that everybody can see, be transparent, start letting your team be more self-organizing and empowered, and demonstrate to the rest of the company that you're taking this seriously. Before you ask them to do anything, do it yourself.
Fantastic. Jeff, this has been great. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you being on the show. It's been wonderful. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and all the wonderful resources that you offer.
Oh, great. Thanks. You can find out about me, not just me, but this entire idea of agile and self-organization and empowering organizations at our website at agilecxo.org. Of course, I'd love for you to take a look at the book and buy it from Amazon.com, Great Big Agile. And for those of you that are in the business of helping companies improve performance, if you're interested in Agile, we actually are looking for folks to partner with us and work with us. So if your company has an interest in implementing some of the ideas we've been talking about today with your clients, we are happy to have you as a partner and happy to share with you our models and our materials and our assessment methods. So we call that being an Agile CXO partner. We'd love to have you, and you can also find out more about that at agilecxo.org.
And is that a certification program or something, Jeff?
Yes, what we do is we certify your consulting firm as well as the people in your company to be what we call APH assessors and coaches. And that certifies you to deliver assessment, coaching, and training content to your clients, and essentially assess your clients' organizations for their level of agility, whether they are adopting, transforming, or mastering, and put them on an evolutionary path. So that company in itself can become a certified APH organization.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. It has been a pleasure and honor having you here. Thank you for all that you've shared. Thanks for the laughs. I hope you'll stay tuned with us till the end. And for you, dear listener, you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going searching for us on Facebook. Just look for Dov Barron's Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Barron, as a leader, a speaker, a strategist for your organization, come find us at fullmontyleadership.com/consulting or fullmontyleadership.com/speaking. Please be aware that the research consistently shows that even the fastest growing companies are faced with the same challenge as you are. They're spending a ton of money, energy, and time attracting, training, and developing top talent, only to have them leave at an alarming rate. If you're frustrated with investing in training and developing your talent, only have them leave before you get your ROI, then come talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping into purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, because you can't outsource authenticity. Also, stop by the Matrix, matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. You don't need a triple W, just Matrix like the movie, .fullmontyleadership.com, and get your authentic leadership matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It's free for you to tune because you tuned in, and you get to find the 5 areas of leadership where your real strengths are and how to tap into them. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about your levels of genuine agility in leadership. Is it a philosophy or is it a practice? I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deep greatness to reach the next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.